The three biggest Feast Week MTEs were won by known basketball schools Auburn, Oregon, and Oklahoma. Wait a minute, what?
Huh?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts back together again. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Schade. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, Monday through Friday, every week of the year. I want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel. As a reminder, it is free to join the Discord. There's a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, folks. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and if you win, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, Isaac, we got football schools out here winning MTEs. We love these MTEs, but we're also starting to get a little worried about them and their longevity, in part because we see programs wanting to prioritize home and homes, which, speaking of home and homes, Ohio State and Pitt, what an incredible game we got from them this weekend. We're going to cover all of that on today's jam-packed post-Feast Week episode here of Locked On College Basketball. I think the big storylines, Isaac, really are around the unique teams that won these events. And we threw Auburn in there because Auburn has not been known historically as a basketball school, but it's not exactly a shock that Auburn won the Maui Invitational. Certainly,
I picked it, baby. Let's go.
I think a lot of people did. I remember we had a conversation on the show about their odds at FanDuel seeming to be a little lower than we thought because they had a tougher run through the side of the region that they were in than UConn. But obviously that did not go well for UConn. It went great for Bruce Pearl and the Tigers, but we're not going to spend as much time on Auburn winning Maui. We've already talked about that on the show, but want to focus on Oregon and Oklahoma in particular, two teams that were not projected by very many people, if anybody, to win their respective tournaments. Oregon winning the inaugural Players Era Festival in a championship game over Alabama, while Oklahoma defeats Louisville in the championship of the Battle for Atlantis, a matchup that quite literally nobody saw coming. The expectation there, of course, was a Gonzaga-Arizona matchup for the first time between Mark Few and Tommy Lloyd as longtime assistant. Gonzaga decided to screw that up immediately by losing their first game in Atlantis. Arizona did not make it to the championship game either, so we wait for another time to see those two teams square off. But Isaac, some interesting results here. Oregon, a team that has been really up and down this season. They're 8-0, but they've played some pretty bad games, but came together at the right time to win this Players Era Festival. Meanwhile, the Fightin' Porter Mosers, they love winning basketball games before conference play. We'll see if they can win enough of them in the SEC to make the tournament. That was the issue for this team last year in the Big 12, but pretty strong start for these two programs.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, it's like, hey, you figure out how to put things together. It's not your fault if the bracket breaks down. All you can do is play who is in front of you. But for Oregon, they were playing the team, projected kind of to be on the other side of that. Andy, watching the game, it kind of felt to me like Alabama got a little bit shell-shocked by the very, very unfortunate Latrell Wrightsell injury, which we're still waiting to hear confirmation. But Andy, I mean, let's be honest, looking at that thing, I don't know how it's anything but an Achilles.
Yeah, didn't look good.
It was like Oregon went on like an 8-0 run after that, and great push by Bama, man. This was a great finish, a super fun game. And we had that, who got that? Was it Biddle got that dunk? Yeah. To kind of, man, I mean, it was just great stuff. Super fun back and forth game, but a really big week and a big win for Dana Altman's club to just give them some juice, as they go through the rest of the non-conference slate. Bama's been kind of weird, Andy. In the Players Era Festival, for example, 14 turnovers, 19 turnovers, 15 turnovers in the 3 games. They're still struggling from 3. Obviously, have a big game this week at North Carolina in the ACC SEC Challenge. I think that'll be telling, but I can't really figure out what to make of Nate Oates' club yet, Andy.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned, confused, I guess. by Alabama at this point. Obviously, the right cell injury is really tough for them. And as we wait kind of as far as I know, there's not a concrete update on Chris Youngblood unless I missed something. But I know the preseason expectation was that he'd be back around conference play. So seems like he's still a little bit of a ways away. I remember noting that Alabama is redshirting Houston Millett, a transfer from Pepperdine, who averaged like 15 points per game last year in the WCC and shot 40+% from three. And they were redshirting him because they felt they had enough depth this year to save an extra year for him, which I think made sense. But with Youngblood hurt and with Wrightsell now hurt and with guys like, Jaron Stevenson has been really struggling. He finally hit some threes in the
warming up, man. He's warming up.
He's warming up, which is great for them. But with some guys struggling, with some guys not having injuries, like I'm kind of curious what's going to happen with Alabama. The turnover issues, I mean, sure, you expect them to struggle with like a Houston, but Oregon's not a great defensive team. I think they're now just outside the top 30 at KenPom, and that's after the win against Alabama. And so they're struggling with teams that I wouldn't expect them to struggle with. And while I think they're going to get, if they get Youngblood back and get into conference play and settle in, I think they're going to end up being fine. But a big shout out to Oregon. Dana Altman's teams historically start showing up in January. It's kind of like a known thing in Eugene of like, oh, we don't really tune in until January because that's when Dana starts tuning in, and that's when the team finally starts to play a little bit of real basketball. And I was kind of curious if that trend was going to continue in the Big Ten, which is deeper and more difficult than the Pac-12 in the past. And instead, Dana said, no, let's just start out the year strong. Like, let's not do that, dinking around for that first half of the year. And they had some struggles. I can't believe the same team that went to overtime against the Portland Pilots just defeated the gauntlet of teams that they just beat: Texas A&M, San Diego State, and Alabama. But that's kind of what we got with this Oregon team. They're inconsistent. Guys like Keyshawn Barthelemy can come off the bench and lead your team in scoring like he did against Alabama. He also will have entire weeks where he doesn't even score 22 points like he did in one game against Bama. So I'm not super sold on Oregon yet. They're going to be in my top 25. They absolutely should be in the top 25, if not top 15, as an 8-0 team with the kind of wins that they just put together. But I'm not sold that they're going to be super consistent in the Big Ten. And I still think they'll probably finish top 5 at this point. And that has more to do about Indiana and Rutgers and some of these other teams just not looking good at all. My preseason darling USC looks awful. That looks like quite a miss on my part there. Happy to admit that one. My other prediction was about UAB. We won't get into UAB, but they're not doing good either. It's been not a good look for Andy's bold predictions to start the season. But yeah, I think this Oregon team is going to end up pretty solid this year, but the consistency, I think, is going to continue to be an issue for them.
Andy, I don't know if you were watching this game in real time, but I thought that, like as the buzzer sounded, Mark Sears had that drop off for Grant Nelson. I thought it was good in real time. I just wasn't paying close enough attention. Yeah. Then as soon as it was very obvious, as soon as we saw the replay, it was that close for Alabama. Andy, for the Players Era Festival, we had these final games. How about San Diego State knocking off Houston in overtime? Big win for the Aztecs. They've had a couple opportunities, played Gonzaga, a couple other games. Texas A&M knocking off Rutgers in the 5th place game. Andy, we were joking before we started recording. It feels like the storyline a lot this year for Rutgers is going to be, well, the Scarlet Knights fall, but Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper go off again. So just copy paste that refrain over and over. And then Creighton, man, they've been struggling, had lost 3 in a row. I was worried about them in this Notre Dame game, the 7th place game, because Ryan Kalkbrenner was out in this game. Stephen Ashworth has been back for the last 2, but Notre Dame, no Marcus Burton, which I think in the long run is probably going to be better for Coach Shrewsbury's team there. But Andy, all in all, I think a successful inaugural Players Era Festival. There was all the weird back and forth with how are we going to do it and what are the logistics going to be. And it seems like it all came together pretty well when it was said and done. I love the going in order of 7th place, 5th place, 3rd place championship game. That was great and a lot of fun there. Andy, any other thoughts on that, or should we say a few quick words about Battle for Atlantis? Because I know we got to keep trucking.
I'll say one quick thing on San Diego State. I like their schedule up to this point in the season. They've played one non-D1 team, Occidental, but other than that, They have played, every team they've played is in the top 100 at KenPom currently. They're 3-2 in those games. They have the win over UC San Diego in the opener. They're 96th at KenPom, and then they have Creighton and Houston, which are two phenomenal wins. If you can go into December having beat those two teams, you feel pretty good. And then you lost to Gonzaga on your home floor, which you never want to lose on your home floor, but Gonzaga's going to still be in the top 10 most likely here when the polls come out. And then you lost to Oregon, which may not be a loss that ages that poorly. And for San Diego State, I mean, this is a team that has done that, has gone 3-2 against all top 100 teams without Reese Waters. And he's going to be back from his injury, hopefully by the end of December, into conference play for them. And for Brian Dutcher's squad to have basically an entirely new look roster with one of the only key returners being Waters, who hasn't been on the floor yet, for this team to be 3-2, to have the wins that they have, is a really promising sign of what's to come for this team. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who love Boise State, and we've seen some good stuff from New Mexico, Nevada, etc. But to me, the path for the Mountain West Championship still goes through San Diego State, and so far so good, I think, for the Aztecs.
Andy, in Battle for Atlantis, you'd already talked about Gonzaga. I still feel the way I did about Gonzaga. I don't think we need to get to that. But I feel like other teams, we learned something about good or bad. For example, Indiana is kind of proving what we thought about them. I know they beat Providence pretty handily in the 7th place game, but man, they got
that's more about Providence, I think, too.
Honestly, they got embarrassed those first 2 games, Andy. Arizona, I think, kind of along that same lines as Indiana. It's like, I don't know how good the Wildcats are going to be. And it's funny because West Virginia, who beats them in the 3rd place game, West Virginia knocks off Gonzaga and Arizona in this game. It's something about the Mark Few coaching tree, apparently, Andy. But man, congrats to Coach DeVries on what they're doing. Like West Virginia, I mean, this is just making the Big 12 all the more interesting. Big time stuff there. Obviously, we learned stuff about Louisville as well, and certainly Oklahoma. So it's like, I feel like Battle for Atlantis we learned a lot about a lot of teams.
Yeah, it was real interesting. I mean, even Davidson, a team that's not expected to be, wasn't projected to finish super high in the A10. They look pretty good. Like, I think that this was a tournament that really taught us a lot about a lot of different teams. In fact, I'd argue Gonzaga is the team that we almost learned the least about. Like, we kind of knew they might be susceptible to games against hot shooting teams with bigger guards, and that's what ended up happening in that West Virginia game. And then they, destroy the other 2 teams that they played. Indiana didn't look good. I'm was skeptical about them just because of the lack of 3-point shooting. And I thought their guards would be better than this, but they have not been good. But a big shout out to West Virginia. I think they were the most impressive team, despite not being the team that won. Obviously, Oklahoma deserves some credit here as well. Jeremiah Fears, one of the youngest players in college basketball. He was extraordinary in this tournament. He has been extraordinary all season long for the Sooners. He was a great pickup for Porter Moser's team, and I think he's going to be a player to watch going forward this year for sure. Louisville, we knew they had talent. We knew Pat Kelsey was a good coach. We knew that this was a talented roster. I'm just surprised at how quickly they came together to do as well as they did. I think they're going to be a team that has their ups and downs. They're going to have a game where you expect them to win, and they're just going to come out and look flat and lose. And then they're going to have games where you're like, oh, they're probably not going to win that one, but they're going to go out on the road and beat a better ACC team. Like, I just think that that's what we're going to see from this Louisville team as they kind of find all the pieces. And then Pat Kelsey's going to have to do it all over again because half of his team is 5th-year seniors. So then you got to redo this whole process. And eventually, after a couple of years, I think you'll start to see some real consistency and potentially some real strength from that Louisville squad. But a nice showing from them, as well as West Virginia and Oklahoma and Atlantis.
And we're going to have to wait and see, unfortunately, Cason Pryor suffered an injury for Louisville. I had read an update. Somebody had been in touch with his dad, and his dad said he was going to have an MRI today. So we're hoping the best for Cason Pryor. But it's just hate injuries, Andy, man. It's such a bummer when we get these things. So we'll continue to track. Speaking, you said about Davidson, the A10 might be better than we thought, Andy, because I was really impressed by Dayton this week at Maui. We know VCU is good, and if Davidson can keep, we could get a multi-bid A10 this year, Andy. Could be good stuff. Speaking of Maui, after going 0-3, Dan Hurley said he's done with 3-game MTEs. Is this a trend worth being concerned about? And was this an unfortunate timing for Dan Hurley to talk about something that made it seem like he's taking his ball and going home? Well, we'll get into all of that because it's wacky. All that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers, you can bet $5, and if it wins, you get $150 in bonus bets. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, well, you're already there. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right there on that same page. So how about, Andy, some SEC regular season champ odds? We were just talking about Auburn. Well, Auburn is your SEC favorite right now, plus 200, followed by Alabama and Tennessee, plus 310. That has certainly flipped. State of Alabama Civil War. Kentucky, plus 1100, Florida, plus 1600, and Arkansas, plus 2500. Andy, I don't think that's what we thought it would be, but there we are. Go check it all out at FanDuel.com today. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Andy, for as long as I can remember, these MTEs, even before we called them that, are just a major critical part of the fabric of our sport, of college basketball. Like, I can recall the Sports Center graphics from like 1993 talking about the Great Alaska Shootout, man, just all of these phenomenal events. And earlier this summer, as Players Era Festival became a thing, we started to worry about it from an NIL standpoint. For example, Creighton opting out of Battle for Atlantis to play in this. But now, Andy, it seems that there's like another kind of threat as we're looking at coaches maybe not wanting to be in these events for various reasons, right? It's the travel's a lot. It's a lot on the players, the 3 games in 3 days thing. And Andy, we get into a situation where Dan Hurley has some comments that are unfortunately timed in light of what just happened to UConn last week. Let me read it to you, and then I'd love to get your reaction. Andy, this is from Dan Hurley. Quote, "I'm not doing another 3-game MTE again. Moving forward, we will only play home and homes or single game events in big time arenas. I don't think I'll ever do a 3-game MTE again unless I'm not coaching here at some point somewhere else. There's zero chance I'll do that again." End quote. Andy, what do you think about this from Coach Hurley?
Yeah, I think it'd be easy to just dunk on Hurley, because that's what I think the majority of people are doing, is kind of saying, oh, like we said, he's taking his ball and going home.
Which is funny that we both independently said that. I tweeted it. You put it in our show notes. I think that's hilarious. Keep going.
I think it is hilarious too. And I think it is the easy, kind of the low hanging fruit in this situation. And to some extent, yes, like I had heard that UConn was kind of planning to potentially move away from MTEs even prior to Dan Hurley's comments. And I think that may be true, but the timing of the comments, I mean, you have to know that people are going to make the kind of jokes that we're making and that many others are making, where they're going to call him a whiner or a crybaby. Like, you have to know that that's going to happen when you choose to make a comment saying, I'm not going to do this again, after your team gets embarrassed and goes 0-3. Like, the optics are not good. I think everybody can pretty much agree with that. But I think there's more to this conversation. And I'm glad we're kind of going about it in a different way, because it does potentially present UConn not doing MTEs is not going to be the death of MTEs. Like, I don't want to, that's obviously far too dramatic, but there are multiple factors starting to work against these 3-game MTEs. And I do want to get into those, but I also want to say one other thing about Dan's comments specifically, since we are still picking on him a little bit. The idea of, we're only going to play home and homes. Like, that would be great if you were. Like, that would be great. And it's not just UConn, but other teams are saying this too. Like, well, we'd rather play, like more home and home series instead of doing the MTEs. And it's like, okay, then do that, because most teams aren't doing that. Every team that UConn has played in the non-conference outside of their MTE has been outside the top 300 at KenPom. And in fact, almost all of them are outside of the top 350 at KenPom. 3 of UConn's non-conference opponents this year are among the 11 worst teams in college basketball, according to KenPom. And that's fine. If that's who you want to play, if those are the teams you want to buy and get those Ws, that's okay. But don't give me a spiel about how you're going to skip out on MTEs so you can play more home and home series if you're not going to play more home and home series. And again, UConn is. They're playing Baylor. Now it's part of the Big 12 Big East Challenge, but whatever, that counts. They're playing Texas. That's a road game for them. They're playing Gonzaga. It's at Madison Square Garden. They played them at Climate Pledge Arena last year in Seattle, so that's a neutral site game, but that's fine. So I would rather see them actually be willing to play the true home, the true road games, if you're going to not do the MTEs. But I think ultimately Hurley's comments and other comments we've seen from other coaches, from other programs, seem to point towards a couple of things that might be working against tournaments like Maui and like the Battle for Atlantis, which could be cause for concern about how long they're going to be viable events in the college basketball space.
Man, yeah. Because on first glance, you know what coach kind of jumped into mind, Andy, when I first heard this clip from Coach Hurley? It felt very Coach Cal to me. Something he would say, like, after Kentucky would lose, it's like, well, we're just not doing that anymore.
Also, I'm pretty sure Kentucky hasn't played in an MTE in like 15 years. So yeah,
exactly. Right. Like it's that same kind of thing. And I think that's part of it. What you're saying is like, I don't want to equate those two things because I think this is truly preconceived for UConn. It's not just a reaction to, we went 0-3 in Maui. Right. Like, and so I love you threading that needle there and making sure we're looking at this with full context. I think that's appropriate for us to be able to do. But the other thing here is this threat to these MTEs is not just from UConn, as you said. It's Mark Few has hinted at this just because of my closeness to covering North Carolina. I have heard hints of Hubert Davis talking about, like, I think we might be done with these kind of things. And this is going to be sad if that starts happening, Andy, because as we said, these are part of the fabric of college basketball and what we love. But I mean, you even look at like the past two Maui fields we've had, for example, have been insane. And next year's is fine. Yeah. And is that just a coincidence or is that a sign of the times, Andy? That's what the next couple of years are going to show us.
Yeah. And I think, next year's the second year of the Players Era Festival. People will have seen that it went successfully this year. Gonzaga is one of the teams that's already agreed to do it next year. I think there's other very high-profile programs, in addition to many of the teams that did it this year who are also doing it next year. And I think all of them, I think you had to sign up for 3 years. And so you add Gonzaga and a bunch of other teams for next year. Like, yeah, it feels like not a coincidence. It feels like those teams are choosing to do this MTE because there is a $1 million payout in NIL money for these programs, which why wouldn't you choose to do that as opposed to, Maui or Atlantis? Like if you want to go all the way to the Bahamas and not make any NIL money, or you can go to Las Vegas, which is closer for not every team, but a lot of teams that are in college basketball. You can go to Vegas. It's more familiar for a lot of people, and you might make $1 million, or you will make $1 million. So that to me is the biggest threat right now. It's also, that is an event that does not take place 3 consecutive days. At least it didn't last year. We'll see what it looks like in 2025. But this past weekend, they had, game, day off, game. That might make a difference for some of these teams. I mean, I think some programs feel like playing 3-3 is too difficult. And, it does. People say, oh, it helps match the tournament, experience. Like, you don't do that in the tournament either. Like it's a pretty specific thing. And so I do think that there are some things that might change. And it's not like Atlantis and Maui are just going to disappear. They're just going to be gone one day. But like ESPN events used to be a much bigger event. And this year, we'll talk about it in the final segment here. Not a great event. Not only 4 teams over 2 days. Not super high profile programs. Like that's what could start happening to Maui and Atlantis is you just gradually see less and less teams. Bloated conference schedules mean that these, the high profile programs in the Big Ten and the SEC, they don't have as many conference or as many non-conference games. So they're going to prioritize doing them in different ways. And they're going to do the scheduling agreements with the other conferences. And yeah, I think there's a very legitimate reason to feel like Maui and Atlantis, again, they're not going to disappear, but that they're not going to be the same as they've been for the last couple of decades. And that's sad because they're some of the most fun parts of college basketball. I don't think Feast Week will die, but I do think it will change. And in some ways, maybe it'll be fine. It'll just be at a different place and with a different name. But it's something that I think is it's not a if, it's more of a when.
Unless these events can update and modernize and become MTE or NIL events on their own. Like, come on, Maui Jim, buckle up, or pony up. Let's get it. And another part of it, Andy, is I guess, conference tournament. These 3-3 do mimic conference tournaments, or the majority of it. I know not all are just straight days in a row, but that's a thing. But there's just so many factors at play here. We'll continue to watch. Dan Hurley, just again, a week of not doing himself any favors, did not do himself any more favors here either.
Well, speaking of MTEs, that's been the through line here on today's episode. And we got 5 more champions that were crowned over the weekend. We're going to talk about those, plus an epic standalone game between Pitt and Ohio State to discuss, all rounding out the show with our weekly 6-pack coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, college basketball season is here, and there is nothing better than the atmosphere of a college hoops game. The anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy of the crowd, the unexpected coming to life, thrilling wins, and more. And Game Time has a new feature now called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. And it's not just for basketball. You can use it to go to concerts, to go to comedy shows, to go to theater, and more. And whether it's Game Time's ticketing coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app, Game Time has got you covered. If you want to go see Storrs, Connecticut, Baylor, go into UConn, see if the Bears can hand the Huskies another loss in the Big 12 Big East Challenge. The cheapest ticket right now at Gamble is just $48 on Game Time. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Isaac, closing out the show, talking about the 5 other MTEs that finalized over the weekend, who won those events, what it might mean for those teams. We're going to go through them quickly, but first, there was an epic standalone game that kind of stood out over the weekend outside of the MTE space. Isaac, why don't you tell us about that one?
Yeah, man. Pitt goes to these home and homes we've been talking about. Pitt goes on the road to Ohio State. This is the front end of it. Next year, we'll be back at Pittsburgh. And the Panthers go to Columbus and get out of there with a 91-90 overtime victory. We had a buzzer-beating 3 for Zach Austin to win it. Andy, the funny thing is, in real time, I think it had gotten to where Ohio State was up like 4 or 5 with I don't remember how many seconds to go. And I was about to hop in the shower. We had been decorating for Christmas. And I was like, I got to take this shower. This game's over. I'm going to hop in, but I'll leave it up. I propped my phone up to where I could see it in the shower. And of course, it was the worst decision ever because I'm trying to get all the steam off the shower door. Couldn't see what was happening. And then finally, I was like, dadgummit, why am I missing this game? So I had to get out and rewind it and watch it all. But Andy, this is my favorite kind of buzzer beater. We were talking about this earlier because it's not like the game was tied where, if you miss it, whatever, we're going to overtime. This was like do or die. If we miss this shot, game over. If we make this shot, game over. But then it's amplified because you're down 2. You could go for the tie. Zach Austin takes the 3. It's like, hey, we're going for a win on the road, and they get it, man. So I love this. Is my favorite kind of buzzer beater. Great stuff. Huge true road win for Pitt, Andy, I think is the big storyline here for the Panthers, who are now kind of looking like a top 3 ACC team. They are second in the ACC at KenPom right now, just ahead of North Carolina with only Duke ahead of them. And so Coach Capel's got this thing going. I don't think anything less of Ohio State and Coach Diebler. I think these are 2 teams who we think a lot about. And so good for them, man.
Yeah. Moving on to talk about some of the MTEs. I think the rest of the MTEs we're talking about are all 4-team events. So just 2 games over 2 days. We're talking first about the Rady Children's Invitational in San Diego. This one went exactly how I would have projected that it goes. Purdue defeats Ole Miss in the championship game, 80-78. Miles Colvin with a putback of a Braden Smith miss just before the buzzer wins it for the Boilermakers. The third place game, BYU and NC State. BYU gets a 11-point victory there over the Wolfpack. This was a fun little MTE. Again, 4 teams, but 2 of them that were in the Final Four last year in Purdue and NC State. Ole Miss was ranked coming into this game. BYU is a team that's been getting some attention in that conversation as well. 4 high major teams. Just a fun event in San Diego. Shout out to the Boilermakers. They've played a really tough schedule so far this year and have looked very, very good in the first year of the post-Zach Edey era. These were some fun games to watch here in San Diego.
Andy, ESPN Events Invitational, you referenced it earlier. We got the champion. We thought we didn't get the championship game that we thought. Florida knocks off Wichita State 88-51. Good for Wichita State to get a win to get into this championship thing. But Florida manhandled the Shockers in this thing. They were up 37-18 at the half. And then they scored over 50 points in the second half. I mean, it was just an absolute stomping. And in the third place game, Wake Forest beats Minnesota 57-51. I thought they should have paired these teams differently in the semifinals, Andy. I thought it was weird to have Florida and Wake and then Wichita State and Minnesota, but whatever. It was what it was, and we move on with that. Wake Forest, man, they're not doing what we thought they would. They got to play better.
Yeah, agreed. The next two are both Acrisure. There's the Acrisure Classic and the Acrisure Invitational. Starting with the Classic, the championship, Arizona State, Bobby Hurley's team, does not suffer the same challenges that his brother Danny Hurley suffered. The Sun Devils beat St. Mary's 68-64 to win the championship. Huge stuff from Bobby Hurley's team. St. Mary's got there by thrashing USC in the game before that. I think USC scored 36 points. It was just a demolition by Randy Bennett and the Gales. But Arizona State, they're 7-1. 7-1 on the year. Their only loss is a road game against Gonzaga, and they were in that thing until the final minute. They have 4 wins over top 90 teams at KenPom currently. St. Mary's, who they beat in the championship game here. They also have wins over New Mexico, Grand Canyon, and Santa Clara. I'm interested to see. I mean, we were talking about West Virginia earlier. There's been some kind of teams not expected to be even in the top 10 of the Big 12 who've looked pretty good early on. I'm curious to see how West Virginia and Arizona State and even Colorado and some of those other teams look when we get into conference play, because I think there could be some surprises in those standings. New Mexico beat USC by 10. Like I said earlier, my prediction that USC is going to be a top 10 or top 5 or top 3 team in the Big 10. I don't think any of those things are going to happen. So, you got to go bold with your bold predictions, and you got to admit when you get them wrong. And unless Eric Musselman turns this thing around real quickly, I'm thinking USC is going to be much closer to the bottom than the top of the standings in the Big 10.
Andy, go ahead and mark it down now. Either Bobby Hurley or Darren DeVries is going to be the Big 12 Coach of the Year, because that's how it always goes, right? In the other Acrisure event, the Invitational, Washington beats Santa Clara 76-69 in the championship game. Colorado State beats TCU 76-72 in the third place game. TCU not winning an event that also, or not winning a single game in an event that had Colorado State, Santa Clara, and Washington. Yikes.
Yep.
That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, not we're talking about the not top 10 projected Big 12 teams having good weeks. Not all of them had good weeks. TCU, not a good week for Jamie Dixon's club. Last event here, the Arizona tip-off. The championship was Butler. There's a lot of conversation about the Big East being problematic this year, and look, they're right. It is a problem, but Butler is not part of that issue. They defeat Mississippi State 87-77 to win the championship of the Arizona tip-off. Third place game, Northwestern takes down UNLV 66-61. Nice to see a W by Butler over a good Mississippi State team that I think will compete in the SEC night in and night out. Nice to see Northwestern pick up a win here. UNLV, a quality mid-major team. That's a nice W for Northwestern.
Andy, tonight, Monday night, just not much going on. That's why we're not previewing things. 16 total games in Division I. Only 12 of them feature D1 versus D1. Not much to talk about, but we got some great stuff later this week. ACC, SEC Challenge, Big 12, Big East Challenge. That we'll start getting into all that on tomorrow's show, doing some previews for that. Also, Andy, in real time, we're watching the Bills and the Niners play in snow, and it looks absolutely miserable to me. Would you want to get out there in this kind of condition, or does that seem as
as somebody in the very temperate Pacific Northwest, I'm good on not having a whole lot of snow. So yeah, no, not for me.
Oh, and these guys, I like Josh Allen's out here with no sleep. Like, what do we do? I can't with that.
He's from Wyoming, right? He's from Wyoming, so yeah, he can handle it.
All right, he's a dude. I'm just a pansy, Andy. I'm from Atlanta. We don't do this. We get out of school if the buses can't start because it's too cold, right? Come on. All right, folks, that's it for today's show. Thanks so much for joining us for hopefully what should be another fun week coming off of Feast Week here. If you haven't subscribed to the show on YouTube and audio, make sure you do so that you don't miss a second of Locked On College Basketball. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats in all your various forms. Sorry about you, Arizona. Yikes. We'll talk again tomorrow, but until then, Peace.